WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Developing Accessible Gutenberg Blocks with speaker Kevin Sholander, Senior Web Developer at CodeGeek. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Well, hello, everyone. This is WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. My name is Jessica Sams from Yolantis, Website Mentor. Thank you for joining us for Developing Accessible Gutenberg Blocks with Kevin Sholander. Feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section. That's the icon with a question mark on it if you want us to see it and respond to it. You can add your questions as you think of them, and then we will do our best to respond at the end of the session. Use the chat icon to connect with other attendees and keep your eye on it for messages from our tech support. So let me go ahead and introduce Kevin. Kevin's a senior web developer at CodeGeek, where he has spent the past 5 years creating accessible and user-friendly digital experiences. Specializing in web accessibility, Kevin ensures that websites and applications are designed to serve users of all abilities, benefiting a diverse range of clients, from local businesses to international corporations. And before joining CodeGeek, Kevin spent some time as an adjunct instructor of web development and computer information systems at the local community college. He also had a previous career in hardware engineering, designing CPU and GPU silicon for AMD, HP, and National Semiconductor. In addition to his professional work, Kevin is also an entrepreneur designing, constructing, and running the Marquee escape rooms in Fort Collins, Colorado, with his family. Kevin, are you ready to take it away?
I sure am.
All
Let's
right.
get my screen share going. Thank you, Jessica, for that nice introduction. Let's see, as Jessica stated, I'm Kevin Sholander, and we're going to spend the next 50 minutes or so talking about developing accessible Gutenberg blocks. There's going to be a lot of interesting links, I hope, at least for everyone. There's sites that I have bookmarked that I refer to every day that I've linked in this document in the resources section. So if you haven't had a chance to connect with the document, with the slide deck, you can download it from the WordPress Accessibility Day schedule site, or use the QR code that's here. And before we get started, I want to give a shout out to a previous session that I saw today that if you didn't catch it earlier, Natalie McLeese gave an excellent presentation on accessibility challenges with single page applications that I personally found was very interesting. And if you're interested in what I'm going to be talking about and you didn't see her presentation, I can only wish to present as well as she did. So go back and watch that when the recording's available. Jessica covered everything about me, so I'm going to just skip on over so that we can get started. This presentation is designed for web developers building custom themes and or plugins in the WordPress environment. So I'm expecting that you're coming into this presentation with some knowledge of HTML, PHP, CSS, JavaScript, the basic building blocks of the web. If you are just here because you want to see how things are put together, that's fine too. You'll get a drink from the fire hose maybe a little bit, but I'm trying to make this a more advanced presentation so that any developers out there who have been sitting in through all the other sessions today and saying, well, this is all really good, interesting information. How do I actually apply it? That's what this presentation is about. And towards the end of this presentation, I hope to give some demos on keyboard testing and screen readers, so that give you some skills that you might use for testing your own sites. Before we start, I want to say what accessibility means to me as a developer. Everybody probably comes into this a little bit differently, and for me, what accessibility means is that the code that I develop is going to provide consistent and conformant set of behaviors and structures so that users can experience and interact with the sites that I build using whatever technology works best for them. I deliberately leave out things like screen readers and keyboard navigation. That's not what I mean by accessibility. What I hope is that when I design a site, it is responsive, it works well on all devices. So if you're accessing the site through a mobile device or a laptop or a desktop machine, you will have a rewarding experience and get the information that you're trying to get to. If you're using a screen reader or a keyboard, well, I hope the same. So accessibility encompasses all the technologies that are out there for accessing and reading and interacting with the websites. We use tools like Browser Stack and screen readers like VoiceOver and whatnot to test that all of the custom code that we build is truly accessible to the maximum number of users. So in this presentation, we're going to be looking at a particular Gutenberg block that I put together. The code is available to everyone through GitHub, or you can download the zip file from the WordPress Accessibility Day details for this presentation. The Gutenberg block that I chose to implement is a button with a pop-up. Very simple. You click the button, pop-up opens. And at this point, we're going to leave the slides behind and start looking at what it is we're building and some code. So I'm going to start by showing you, here's an example usage of this button, this contact us. You click it, it opens a contact form. You can fill out information, you can click the submit, and then there's a close button to toggle it on and off. On the back end, what that looks like is it's a Gutenberg block. So we can go into a page editor and add the block in here. So if I want to add a new version of this, I can pick it out from the list, accessible pop-up. You can see there's a blank button, and the empty pop-up shows up automatically there when you add the block in there. Then there are some ACF fields that can be filled out here to add the button label. So whatever we want to put in here, I'll just use button label and default pop-up. There we go. So that will add a title to my pop-up when it opens. And then, because it's Gutenberg and we're working in blocks, we can add blocks into our pop-up to add content. Let's say I want to put a paragraph in here that says, please fill out the form below. And I can put whatever I want in here, it doesn't matter. And add other blocks in here. So if I want to add a form block, I can select the contact form. And there it is. I've built myself a pop-up that has a contact form in it. I've added a couple of features that are available in the Gutenberg editor that under the advanced tab, I've enabled the addition of a custom anchor or additional CSS classes. I'll show you that in just a moment where that comes from. And then I've also added just the bare minimum amount of styling so that I can give an example of how it's done without overcomplicating the code. But you can see if I can add some padding and some, top and bottom padding and left and right padding to it, and make my block look like what I would like it to look like on the front end. Click save. I can go back to the page, load that up, and I have an additional. Actually, I added extras. So here's my beautiful pop-up. please fill out the form below, and you can see the padding and stuff show up there. I'm going to remove the ones I got wrong. So let's delete that. And we'll delete that one was a practice from earlier. All right, so let's look at the code that makes this possible. When you download the zip file, you'll find a README file. There's some notes in there about considerations that I was making as I built this block. There's some accessibility considerations in there, things that we need to make sure that this block does. So, and we'll look at each of these features as we step through. And then if you want to try out this block in your own theme or your own plugin, all you have to do is clone the repo into your theme or plugin, add this require once line to your functions.php or your plugin's PHP code, and then you're good to go to insert the block into the page editor. Note that I developed this block using the ACF Pro plugin just because it's accessible to me. We have the license here and we use it frequently for all kinds of things, and it gives access to the ACF fields and whatnot in the back end. But if you would like to develop your blocks using native React code, that won't change any of the concepts that we're going to look at here. This block requires ACF Pro, but you can certainly rewrite the stuff into React if you choose. So looking at the individual files, WordPress expects a block.json file. This file defines some of just the properties of our block. It doesn't give much functionality, but it tells what the name of the block is. We've got a keyword list here. There's the icon that's going to be used when you're working with the block in the editor, a description so that people will know what it does. So some of that stuff shows up here in the block editor. It's just there to make life useful for the authors that are going to be adding your block to the page. Also in here is a script that's going to be enqueued on the front end. Note that if you're writing a React native block, you're also going to have a backend script that's going to contain your backend JavaScript that actually renders the block. There's a CSS file that I've thrown in here for this pop-up. Because this is an ACF block, there's an ACF section in here that has a pointer to a PHP file that acts as our render callback. So that's going to be called whenever the block is rendered on either the front end or the back end. And then here is a section of properties. This defines what features of the Gutenberg editor that we want to use. So as we saw earlier, we've got the anchor and the classes that I'm supporting. That's defined in this supports properties here, anchor and custom class name. And then this is the spacing. I turned on padding so that we can adjust padding in the back end. I'm going to point out this extra one down here at the bottom, JSX. I set that to true because that allows my block to behave as a container that can hold other blocks. So that's what gives me the ability to drag and drop things into my block and add more content inside of that block. Moving on to the popup.php file. This is really the heart, the guts of the block. This is where all of the logic lives. I've created a class called popup, and not to get overly technical, but it is a singleton class, meaning that there's only going to be one instance of this popup that exists at any time during the execution of all of the WordPress code, regardless of how many pop-ups there are on the page. And I control that by creating this init function that says if an instance of this object already exists, then just return that instance. Otherwise, if it doesn't exist, let's create a new one. There's a constructor here, and this is where the first time that the block gets called, we are going to inform WordPress that we have a new block that we're creating, register block type. Look in this directory, find the block.json file, and use that to enqueue all the assets that are needed for the block. And it adds it into the backend in Gutenberg, and just generally informs WordPress what's going on. Similarly, there's a call that we're making here to ACF to say, hey, we've got an ACF JSON file in this folder as well. When ACF boots up and it's going through all of its initializations, please include our ACF JSON in that. That way we'll get the form groups that show up for entering our button labels and pop-up title and stuff. There's a helper function in here called decode spacing that I found that I needed at some point, and I rewrote it a few times and then decided, hey, it's going to be part of the class and it's always going to live here. When Gutenberg passes back the information that we set in for the padding or for other spacing, like margins or whatnot, it passes back either a variable name or a CSS unit for distance, like 10 pixels or 3 rems or something like that. So this is just a quick helper function that looks at what gets passed back from Gutenberg and converts it into something that I can use at adding styles to my block. All right, so here, the display block, this is our rendering portion of the code. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where everything happens. So in this display block, this gets called whether we're rendering on the front end or on the back end. Gutenberg is going to say, hey, we need to display this block on the page. And it passes us some information about the settings that were made in Gutenberg, some of the contents. This is preview is helpful. It tells us essentially whether we're in the editor or whether we're on the front end. And then there's some other information that gets passed in here. And this block doesn't use them all, but I listed them all just in case people want to dive in and see what's there. I start out by parsing out all the information from the block that Gutenberg gives us. So if the author has entered an anchor here, we're going to grab that anchor. Otherwise, we're just going to generate a unique one. Grab the class names in case they've typed in a class name in the editor. We're going to ask ACF to please provide us with the button label and the pop-up title that were entered when the block was added in Gutenberg. And then here's the code that uses that decode spacing that parses out all the different spacing for padding left, padding top, padding right, padding bottom. And if I were going to do margins, it would look identical to this. All right, so that's all background stuff. Here is the real stuff. This is where the magic happens. So in the web world, all of our content is delivered as HTML. So the purpose of all this code is to generate HTML and to generate it in an accessible way. The most important thing, if you only leave with one thing from this presentation, it's that when writing HTML, semantic HTML is the only way to do it. If you're not familiar with semantic HTML, what that really means is HTML provides us with a large vocabulary of different elements, and each one has an intended purpose. If you use the right element for its intended purpose, most of your work in accessibility will be done already. It'll be done for you by the browser itself. So, for instance, I have added a button to the site, and that button, let me reload with just the one button on there. That button is a button, and you've probably had this drilled into you many times today, but if you haven't, here it is. A button is element that when clicked on, it does an action. It does something. It changes some state on the page. A link is an element on the page that when you click on it, it takes you somewhere. So this button, I shouldn't have, but I could have used, say, a div element in its place here. And if I save that as a div, you'll see that we still have the contact us. It still looks the same. I could still click on it and it works just fine. But it's not semantically correct. It's a div element. And you may not notice it when you're testing, but if you do keyboard testing and I start tabbing through, you can see my focus state is indicated by this little orange box here. When I tab from here, I would expect it to land on the next interactive element. And when I hit tab, it takes me all the way down to the footer and skips my button. Why does it skip the button? Well, a div is not an interactive element. The browser doesn't know what you're trying to do with that div. So you might be inclined to then say, well, why don't I add a roll of button to it? And that will now make it a button. Yes and no. Screen readers will call it out as if it is a button, but I still can't tab to it. I'm hitting the tab and going over it. Buttons have a lot more than just a role assigned to them. They do a whole bunch of other things. So then you're going to have to add tab index and other things, and it just gets really, really messy. And you're starting to add all of this ARIA code to something, whereas if you just use the correct semantic element to begin with, you get all that work done for you by the browser. So if that's all you leave with from this presentation, I would be happy enough. All right. Generally, building blocks in Gutenberg, you're not going to have to use a lot of ARIA unless you're building some sort of interactive UI type thing, which we are in this case. I wanted to come up with an example that required at least some ARIA so that you can see how it's done. But generally, no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. So if you're don't really know for sure what you need to add, if you don't add anything, you're making not a bad choice. However, for this particular button, I've added a bunch of ARIA because I want to tell the screen readers and through them tell the user what it is this button is going to do, so that they have an idea when they click on it, and whether they want to click on it first, and then what's going to happen. So this button has a pop-up that will be announced by the screen reader. You're on a button, it has a pop-up. The pop-up type is dialogue. You'll often see just a true put in there, and that means the pop-up type is a menu. That's the default setting for ARIA, has pop-up. You could also specifically call out menu there. But in this case, I'm opening a dialogue. I would like it to be announced as a dialogue so the user's not surprised. They're not looking for a menu and then find a dialogue. This is what's known as a state. ARIA has states, roles, and properties. This one's a state. What I showed you earlier, role is button. The role sort of indicates what the purpose of the element is. Sorry, this is a property, not a state. This is the property is it has a pop-up. A state is something that is going to change as the button does its thing. So if you click on it, the button may change state. And in this case, ARIA expanded is the state. So that tells us, is the pop-up that we talked about on the previous line, is it open or is it closed? ARIA expanded false means that when we first load the page, the pop-up is not open. When we click the button, we would like that state to change. So The browser is not going to control those states for us, so we're going to have to write some JavaScript in order to manage the ARIA states. There's another property here, ARIA controls. What that does is it ties this button together with the dialog that's being controlled. So it's an ID. Here's the ID of the pop-up. When this button is clicked, this is the element that's being controlled. So if you've got a menu that's an unordered list, it would tie, ARIA controls would tie to that unordered list. Moving on to the dialog itself, when we open the dialog, there's a lot of information in there that we would like the screen reader to assist us with. One is this dialog needs a label, and the label that we've attached is contact us. And I have added it as an H2 element down here and called it title. And I use the ACF field that the user provided. So they filled it out and said the pop-up title is going to be contact us. And sure enough, when we open it up, we can see there's a H2 there that says contact us. It is, the ID is connected to the dialog using the ARIA labeled by. ARIA labeled by is very similar to ARIA label, but it just means it's labeled by another element that's on the page. And whenever you open this item, go and refer to that other element and inform the user what it is that is happening here. Within this display block, when we call it, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that this is preview is passed in to say if we're in the editor or if we're on the front end. And what I'm doing in this block is if we're in the editor, then I set open to true on this thing so that it's already open and we can add stuff in it. When I first built the block and I didn't have that, I didn't have a dialog visible because I would have to click the contact us button. And since I didn't enqueue the JavaScript on the back end, and I don't want to have my JavaScript enqueued on the back end, I wasn't able to get in there. So having access to this is preview gives us the ability to present a different view of our block in the editor than we're going to get on the front end. The block contains a close button. And we all know it's a close button because it has a big black X in it, and we're all used to seeing that. However, if you're using a screen reader, the black X is actually an SVG that is just a bunch of polygons and points and whatnot. And I've actually set ARIA hidden on that just so that the screen readers don't even bother pushing down into that. So what that means is this button has no content. A button with no content needs a label in order for the screen readers to understand what that button is. So when this button is focused, it should be announced as close pop-up because of the ARIA label that I've attached there. A feature of using the dialog element in HTML, going back to our semantic HTML, dialogs bring a lot of luxuries with them that helps us avoid having to write our own JavaScript code. One of the things that we can do within the dialog is add the autofocus property to an element. And whenever the dialog pops up, then that element will receive focus. In this case, when the pop-up opens, you'll see that it automatically focuses on the close button. And when I close it, the dialog, because the browser knows what a dialog is and it knows what button you click to open it, it's going to automatically focus us back onto the button that we use to open the element with. Saves us a whole ton of work. I originally wrote this presentation using a div for a dialog because I wasn't aware that dialog existed until somebody pointed out, why don't you just use the dialog element? So I looked at it, provides, I stripped out about 2/3 of my JavaScript that was handling focus and keyboard presses and whatnot. And ended up with a much simpler implementation that made it much easier to build and to use. Real quick, jumping down to the bottom, I want to just point out this inner blocks down here is a specific feature of Gutenberg that allows us, wherever we put the inner blocks, that's where the Gutenberg block content is going to show up for us when we render this block. So these are all of our children blocks. So the form itself and this paragraph and other things are going to be stuffed into this inner blocks when Gutenberg walks down the hierarchy of blocks that it's rendering. All right, that was a lot of information in this, and we're moving along quickly. Let's see. There's the render callback that we registered in our block JSON. All it does is calls that display block. ACF wants to see a single file. That is the callback. I didn't want to pass the whole class in here because it made things more complex. So all I do is call that display block. JavaScript code that comes with it, really very simple because, again, the dialog element is doing most of the work for us. We have down at the bottom a couple of click event listeners, one that opens our pop-up, one that closes it. We're allowing multiple pop-ups on the page so we can loop through all the ones that we find and add that listener to it. What does it mean to open the pop-up? Well, we're going to use that attribute that we set earlier to find out what does this button control, find that element that's being controlled, and then use the show modal function, which is built into the browser. It is part of the dialog element. So you can either use show or show modal. If you show modal, it traps focus within that box and makes you graze out the back of the screen. So we're opening it up. We're going to manage our state by setting the area expanded to true so that the screen readers know that now this element that we said was closed earlier is now open. And I'm going to real quick just add a has modal open class to the HTML element so that WordPress has sort of defined this as sort of a standard has modal open whenever they open a modal. It prevents scrolling of the page underneath. So without it, you can open the modal, but still scroll the page. And I don't want to, it seems like bad behavior to me. So closing the pop-up is just doing pretty much the opposite of what we did when we opened it. So when you click a close button, it's going to find the pop-up that the close button lives within. It's going to call the browser's close function for the dialog. And then it is going to figure out what button is used to open that, go find that button and change area expanded to false. And then it's going to remove the has modal open. And if I open the inspector on this, here's the button. You'll see when I click on it, the states change. You can see area expanded goes to true. The dialog element itself gets the open attribute that the browser's handling that for me. So I didn't do that. Our code doesn't do that. We just call the show modal and this thing pops up. And then when I click the close, you can see the open attribute dropped off here and area expanded went to false. All right, and then there's some CSS that controls this. I'm not going to dive into the CSS very much, other than a best practice that I use when I can is to use those area attributes to control the visibility and the stylings of things. That gives me a quick feedback if my area is not working correctly and my area expanded true doesn't get set on something, it won't actually appear and I'll know it's broken without even having to open up a screen reader or do anything else to test that. All right. So that's the code, and everybody has access to that. Feel free to use that, try it out, test it in your own environments. How do we make sure that it's working? So here at CodeGeek, we have various stages of our development. We do different things. There's automated conformance checkers that we use that will run a test on the site. It tells us about things like bad color contrast or missing our alt tags. It tells us if our buttons are too small, the target areas. There's a lot of things that get checked there. We do keyboard testing, and then we do screen reader testing. Both of those are manual and require a real person sitting down and actually trying to use the site. So for automatic conformance checking, Lighthouse is a really good one. If you, I assume most people have at least been somewhat exposed to Lighthouse by now, but I usually run it in a incognito window. You can open up the inspector, go to the Lighthouse tab. There's an accessibility checkbox here. It takes 15 seconds, 30 seconds to analyze a single page, and gives you instant feedback on, am I doing a good job? So something I like about Lighthouse is not only does it tell you what it tested, it tells you the things that it didn't test and stuff that you as the developer of this page or this block now need to go through and make sure that your interactive controls are keyboard focusable. Okay, we'll do that in just a moment. That your elements indicate their purpose and state, and all these other things that are not easily checked by an automated checker. So we'll dive into that in a moment. When we ship our sites, I'll give a shout out here to Equalize Digital. They have an excellent product that we use on many of our sites that do continuous monitoring and keep track of our accessibility audits over time, so we can see how things have progressed and whether content that has been added this month has broken things. Let's see, I personally use Pally CI continuous integration tool that's I found on NPM. It's a great package that can, in my development environment, I've created some scripting that will go and run this tool, and it will step through the entire site, all the pages on my site. And every time I make a change locally, I can run this test. I ran it shortly earlier, and it provides an HTML output. I made a change to get rid of the area label on my button, and it immediately found it. I was happy that it actually worked. And if I click into that, it tells me what the issue is, identifies the item that was the cause of the problem, and lets me find issues that are site-wide very, very quickly and easily. That's available on NPM. There's a download link here that gives more information. I'm not personally responsible for writing that, but I find it very useful. Keyboard testing, we've done a little bit of that, but there is no substitute for keyboard testing. So you just need to get in there and start hitting tabs and arrows and whatever else. So on this particular page, you should always start out on the skip to main content. That's the first sign that somebody has put some effort into making something accessible. When you're in a menu system, you should be able to hit either enter or space on a button to toggle that. You can also, if you're in a menu, hopefully the arrow keys work. So I'm hitting arrows left and right. Space bar toggles a button. I can hit tab. This is a modal. Interestingly enough, when I'm within a modal, dialog modal on Chrome, one of the things that happens is it does actually trap focus within the page when you're in the page, but if you keep tabbing, you go out of the page and into all of the Chrome stuff up at the top, and then when you jump back into the page again, you end up back into the modal. So just a weirdness of Chrome. Let's see, for testing our button, we want to make sure that we can hit the space bar to open it. Notice that the button, the close button is focused. I can hit the enter button there. I can also, when it's open, I should be able to hit the escape key. That should close it again. There is an excellent resource that I've linked that shows you what to expect for every element when you're stepping through keyboard navigation on a page. So I found, I go to this all the time. I'm on the select. What should a select do? Well, I look down here and say, I should be able to use the arrow keys, the space bar, and enter and escape to select things.
And you were on the
Let's see,
WebAIM.
screen reader testing. Oh, we're out of time, aren't we?
Yes, but you were just on the WebAIM tutorial to teach us about the keyboard testing. Can you read us out that URL? Because we can't read it.
Oh, okay. It is webaim.org/techniques/keyboard#testing.
Super
So
actionable.
that's, yes, it really is. I find it, I go here all the time. So if you're doing keyboard testing, screen reader testing, hopefully one of these other sessions that people are doing will show screen reader testing. Just want to leave everybody with use semantic HTML where possible, add ARIA as needed. And I listed the uses for JavaScript here and some great resources. So
We love a good resource.
a lot of good resources. I have all of these bookmarked, and I just went through all my bookmarks and copied them in. So
Yeah.
open to questions.
So I did get some
There are some.
questions. I'll be the one to read them aloud to you for our recording. First, I want to end on a note of gratitude because you got some kudos while you were talking. So you have one that says, outstanding session. Thanks, Kevin. You have one that says, I finally understand the use of inner blocks. Thanks, Kevin. And thank you so much for making such a clear and actionable demo, and you covered a lot in such a short time. So I'm gonna go to our questions that came into the Q&A panel. We have about 10 minutes to go over those, and at 10 till the top of the hour, we're going to take a break. That's how much time we have left. I'll go into the first one. Based on third-party audits I've reviewed, it is not uncommon for some accessibility testing and reporting services to argue modal headings should be an H1 because it's an independent entity. What's your response to that?
I can believe it. I struggle with naming things what they are, and that's a common issue I have. Once I know what it is, I know how to deal with it. But should a modal heading be in H1? I wish I was a native user of screen reader technology so I could experience the site the way people who use those on a daily basis do. For me, I'm leery about adding an H1 there because I don't want it to show up as a really major topic, in the landmarks. This is not equivalent to the page itself, but at the same time, it's really its own entity. We're taking you off the page into this pop-up, so I can see it go either way. And if H1 is the approved mechanism for that, I can certainly understand it, and it's an easy adjustment in the HTML.
Isn't there like a semantic heading for what's in the title bar, but then you can have an H1 in the content of the modal?
Right, so in my modal itself, I used the area labeled by and I pointed to I used an H2 because I
Yeah.
didn't want it to compete with the H1 on the page. So I put an H2 in there and I could have used an H1 and if that's, I can be convinced if somebody says that's the right way to do it, I will certainly switch.
So our next question, it's a long one. I'm going to read it for the record. In your extensive WP experience, how would you suggest building a WCAG conformant website with low to medium complexity for a low to medium budget customer, for example, nonprofit with WordPress? Do you absolutely need a custom theme to be sure all components are programmatically conformant, such as role, label, state, more so than the accessible front-end CSS choices? Trying to explore what can leverage out of the box from WordPress to cut down on dev costs for this demographic of clients that need an intuitive enough web builder, but can't afford custom websites. But the resulting WordPress website absolutely needs to have the potential to be WCAG conformant.
Good question. We, about 2 years ago, here at CodeGeek, we went through an investigation of, we're going to build it, or we need a theme that is accessible or is as accessible as it can be. And at the time, WordPress was coming out with the new full site editing. We wanted to embrace that and move forward with WordPress as. And what we ended up with is we looked at several themes. We found one that was somewhat accessible, but it didn't provide all the features that we were looking for. But if you're looking for an off-the-shelf theme, we looked at a theme called Jace. I don't know if it's still available, but I think it's JACE. And then we ended up building our own. Rolling our own theme that we now use for all of our accessible clients. So you do it once, you invest the effort. We've got recently rolled out our brand new accessible navigation because we've been fighting with native WordPress navigation for a long time where it out of the box was not accessible. And then they've started to add accessibility features, but we've already added the features and then we've started clashing with them. So it looks like WordPress is moving towards more accessible navigation, but we've ended up with our own plugin that we use for building navigations now that we hope to be as accessible as possible, and we have control over that so we can modify it as we move forward. The hope is we will leverage the investment that we made in that theme and that plugin and use it for many, many clients over and over again, in order to keep the costs down. But rolling out a custom theme for a single site is probably not cost effective.
So follow-up question from another audience member. Is Kevin willing to let other people use his base theme? Wink emoji.
Oh, I would have to check with my team on that and see. We built it. We invested a lot of hours into it. So, and I'll check with the team and
bring them on as new customers.
yes. We get. I don't know. Are there more questions?
No
if
comment.
not, I can give a plug for CodeGeek. We do a lot of accessibility work. There's a link at the bottom of the slide deck that takes you to our accessibility page, and you can see some of the products and services that we offer there. So if you need help achieving your accessibility goals and want access to some of the work that we've done, check us out.
And that is smooth.
Shameless plug.
I'm happy that you told me that there was a dialogue element, because I'm not in the weeds that deep with the code to know every single semantic tag. So thanks for that. So I'll do our transition. Thanks for attending this session. Thanks for attending the session with Kevin Sholander on accessible Gutenberg blocks. You can continue the conversation with the chat or on social media using the hashtag WPA11YDAY and hashtag WPAD2024. We'd appreciate it if you go to the address is 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. You can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. Stay tuned for our next session coming up. And the next session coming up is Navigating Neurodiversity, Creating Websites with Inclusivity in Mind with Christina Workman. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit the sponsors page to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you after the break at the top of the hour.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.